The brass was still warm from Lyra's hand when she dropped the spare key into my palm. It lay across my calluses like a small accusation, its teeth catching the hard afternoon light. Behind her, 3 canvas suitcases stood in a neat row on the porch of the coastal Victorian she had rented for 7 years. Eucalyptus leaves clicked overhead. The breeze brought salt from the harbor and the dry, peppery smell of bark. Lyra wore the faded floral dress she painted in, a streak of green watercolor near one pocket, but her shoulders were braced as if the next sound might knock her down. "The movers come at 4, she said, today." I closed my fingers around the key because I didn't trust them to do anything else. 6 weeks of notices, inspections, diagrams, sleepless work. And one rushed housing hearing had narrowed to a written order that still had not arrived. Trenton Morgan had already changed the lock on her conservatory. If the judge denied the emergency stay, he could use the lease's structural hazard clause to force her out of the residential wing before sunset. Lyra's botanical illustration commissions, her glass-roofed studio, and the only home she had kept longer than 2 years would go into a truck. Old timber made sense to me. It carried what it was built to carry. People were harder. I had spent 10 years moving from one historic property to another, repairing permanents for strangers while keeping my own life packed into labeled cases. Lyra glanced toward the driveway. "You don't have to wait with me." "I know." That answer is becoming irritating. It was efficient the first time. One corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. My phone stayed dark. No order from the court. No message from Evelyn Park, the tenant attorney who had filed Lyra's emergency stay, cure notice, counteroffer, and rent escrow petition. No update from Marcus Bell, the city's chief building inspector. The only certainty was the moving company's 4 o'clock arrival and the key cooling inside my fist. I should have told Lyra to keep it. Instead, I put it in my pocket. You don't force a seized bolt, you work it loose. My first mentor had taught me that when I was 19 and impatient enough to snap a century-old hinge rather than admit the rust was stronger than my wrist, penetrating oil, steady pressure, time, Trenton had tried force from the beginning. I had answered with timber measurements and patience. Lyra had answered with documents bearing her own signature. At 2:18, the porch light beside us flickered once in the daylight. 6 weeks earlier, a coastal squall had hit after dark. I was on the wraparound porch of the 1920s craftsman next door, fitting a window casing while rain drove sideways through the scaffolding. Jonah Vale, my foreman, had gone home after reminding me twice that the crew had already worked 10 hours. "Wood won't become more historic if you stare at it all night," he had said. "I'm not staring, I'm correcting a 16th-inch reveal. That is why you eat dinner from gas stations." I had ignored him. Work was quieter than deciding what came after it. At 9:43, timber groaned from Lyra's conservatory. It wasn't a creak. Old houses creak when temperature and moisture change. This was a loaded fiber failure, a low, dragging complaint, followed by the sharp crack of a connection giving way. I crossed the yard with my tool belt still on. Rain poured through a broken section of the glass roof. Lyra stood on a step stool, trying to pull a canvas tarp over the opening while water ran down her arms. Botanical paintings covered the long work tables beneath her. Some were already bleeding green and violet into the paper. "Don't climb higher," I said. "I can reach it. The beam can't." That made her look up. I kept my hands where she could see them. "Do you want me to take the heavy side?" She nodded once. I climbed the short ladder, took the tarp's weighted edge, and drew it across the broken bay. She held the opposite corner while I used a staple gun to fasten the canvas to surviving wood. The staples struck in a hard rhythm under the rain. Problem: open roof, loaded glass, water over commissioned work. Method: remove weight from the cracked connection, brace the span, redirect water. Outcome: the glass stopped moving. I brought in a battery work light and 2 dry 6x6 posts from my truck. Lyra moved her paintings while I cut timber pads and set the braces under the failing beam. We worked without wasting language. She carried paper, I carried load. Rain struck the conservatory until nearly 2. When the final brace took the weight, I stepped back and checked the glass line with a laser. "Stable," I said. not repaired. Lyra handed me a black coffee in a chipped blue mug. You remembered? You buy the same thing every morning at Harbor Market. Observation is a dangerous habit. So is pretending you don't need sleep. I looked at the mug instead of answering. The coffee was too hot and exactly right. She sat on the edge of a dry table, cardigan around her shoulders. Trenton was supposed to repair that joint last week. Trenton Morgan had inherited the property through a holding company, then started buying the rest of the block. He called himself a preservation-minded developer. In practice, he liked old facades when they hit expensive new interiors. Call the city in the morning, I said. Get the decay documented before he says you caused it. She rubbed her left thumbnail against the side of her index finger. I noticed, because I noticed things that failed under pressure. Will that help? It creates a record? What if the record gives him a weapon? I looked up at the cracked beam. Then we make a better record. The next morning, she requested an inspection. 3 days later, Trenton used the preliminary red tag on the conservatory to invoke Clause 18C of her hybrid commercial residential lease. Any uncured structural hazard in the studio could trigger termination of both occupancies after 48 hours. He had ignored the leak, then treated the city's safety notice as proof that Lyra had failed to maintain the premises. The trap had been built before the storm. That same week, Jonah found me asleep in my truck at 6:30 in the morning with a framing plan across my chest. He knocked on the window until I woke. You missed the workshop appointment, he said when I opened the door. I had been scheduled to sign a 3-year lease on a small joinery workshop near the harbor. I had delayed it twice, telling myself I needed to inspect the roof, the wiring, the rent escalation, the drainage, and at least 12 other things that had nothing to do with why I kept avoiding the signature. I'll reschedule. You said that last month. I have the Oregon restoration offer. You have an offer in every direction except staying. I got out of the truck and reached for my tool belt. Jonah blocked the door with one boot. You can't keep fixing buildings so you never have to live in one. That sounded rehearsed. I had 40 minutes while you failed to arrive. I worked until noon without answering him. That evening, Trenton emailed Lyra a new parking restriction. Her client deliveries could no longer use the side drive after 6. The side drive was the only flat route into the conservatory. I saw her standing beside her sedan in the dark, reading the email. The floodlights on my site already angled toward her driveway. I had started turning them before I left, and I never told her. She looked across the yard at me. Did you do that? Do what? Make my driveway visible from the moon. Safety illumination. It's bright enough to interrogate a raccoon. The raccoon should retain counsel. She laughed once, tired and surprised. The sound didn't fix the notice, but it gave the night somewhere softer to land. We spread the parking letter on a sawhorse beneath the lights. Lyra pointed to the lease plan attached to Trenton's email. This boundary is wrong. I leaned closer. How wrong? The service line cut 6 feet into the conservatory parcel. I fetched the property survey from my truck. The current deed, Lyra's grandfathered lease exhibit, and Trenton's redevelopment footprint did not agree. A loading corridor on his permit application ran directly through the west wall of Lyra's studio. What is he building next door? I asked. He told the neighborhood board it was mixed-use restoration, shops below, apartments above. Then why does a residential project need a hotel loading corridor? The floodlights hummed over us. Lyra's thumbnail found her index finger. The wrong boundary was our first real clue. 2 nights later, we worked in the kitchen at her long pine table. Rain tapped lightly on the windows, nothing like the squall. Lyra laid out the original lease map, Trenton's permit footprint, and a utility easement Mara had emailed from the county archive. Mara Moore was Lyra's older sister and a preservation archivist who regarded filing cabinets as a form of moral authority. Her message read, "Found this in a box marked drainage, unimportant, which means some man named it." The easement terminated at the conservatory's rear wall. Trenton's proposed service corridor picked up exactly there. Lyra traced the line with a ruler. He needs my parcel to satisfy fire access and commercial loading. And the planning board deadline? 6 weeks from Friday. That explained the speed. Trenton did not merely want a difficult tenant gone. He needed vacant possession before the planning board reviewed his boutique hotel and retail proposal. Without Lyra's parcel, the corridor failed the minimum turning radius for delivery vehicles, and the utility connection had no lawful path. The central question stopped being whether the beam was unsafe. It became how much of the hazard Trenton had allowed or manufactured to clear land he needed. I reached for my phone. Lyra covered the lease map with her hand. "Who are you calling?" "Marcus. I can request an emergency reinspection under my master license." "Already decided?" "Only the refrigerator compressor filled the room. I can have him there tomorrow." "That wasn't my question." I set the phone down. Her thumb pressed hard into her finger. "You keep turning every feeling into another shift. I'm trying to keep you in your house, and I'm grateful, but you don't get to file things in my name because you're afraid I'll make the wrong choice." I moved the phone away from the papers. "You're right." She watched me, waiting for the defense I didn't have. "Do you want me to file the reinspection request under my license?" I asked. "Or do you want an independent inspector with no connection to my company?" "Both," she said after a moment. "Your measured assessment and an independent structural engineer. I want 2 records Trenton can't collapse into one accusation." "That's the better plan." "I know. I'm an architect of extremely stubborn houses." "You illustrate plants." "Plants are houses for insects. Try to keep up." The refrigerator stopped. Silence settled between us, not empty this time. I sent Priya Shah, an independent structural engineer, a request for an emergency review, but only after Lyra signed the authorization herself. The next afternoon, Trenton arrived with a private locksmith. I was on the Craftsman roof when his black truck entered Lyra's driveway. The locksmith carried a hard case and avoided looking at the house, which told me he'd been given a narrow version of the facts. Lyra stood in the conservatory doorway with the lease in her hand. "The preliminary red tag restricts use of the damaged bay," she said. "It does not terminate possession." Trenton smiled as if patience belonged to him. Clause 18. C gives the owner authority to secure hazardous commercial space. After final determination and failure to cure, you cannot cure a compromised foundation in 48 hours. I came down the scaffold stairs, slower than my first impulse demanded. A framing hammer hung from my belt. I left it there. Trenton glanced toward me. "This is private property." "Read." "So is the tenant's possessory interest." His smile thinned. "Carpenters giving legal opinions now?" "No, reading the line you skipped." I looked at Lyra. "Do you want me to handle the technical part, or do you want to lead?" "I'll lead. You correct him when he lies about the structure." She faced Trenton. "I have requested an independent engineering review and emergency city reinspection. You have written notice. Until those occur, you may not change a lock that blocks access beyond the red-tagged bay." Trenton held out his hand to the locksmith. "Proceed." I removed the folded copy of the city restriction notice from my pocket. The red tag identifies one roof bay. Your lock would block the entire conservatory, including unaffected exit access. Marcus Bell confirmed in writing that broad lockout would violate the posted order. The locksmith took the paper, read it, then closed his case. "I'm not touching that door," he said. For the first time, Trenton lost control of his face. Lyra folded the lease. "Leave my porch." He stepped closer. "You're delaying the inevitable." "No," she said. "I'm documenting it." The locksmith walked back to his van. Trenton followed after a long look at me, but Lyra did not move until his truck cleared the corner. Then her shoulders dropped. "Water," I said. That sounded like an order. "Would you like water?" "Yes." I brought her a glass and set it beside the lease. She drank half, then looked toward the conservatory. "You didn't take over." "I nearly did." "But you didn't." The difference mattered more than the victory. The following morning, Priya Shah crawled beneath the conservatory with a moisture meter, resistance drill, and laser level. Lyra went with her, carrying the structural grid we had begun. I followed behind with a headlamp and framing hammer, tapping each pier and beam while Priya recorded the readings. A cellar spider lowered itself in front of Lyra's face. She stopped. "You're the architect of stubborn houses," I said. "Negotiate." "That is not a house. That is an 8-legged boundary violation." Priya laughed into her respirator. We mapped every support: Pier 4, dry and sound; Pier 5, minor surface moisture; west sill, old-growth redwood, dense and intact; one roof beam, and the connection above it, had failed from long-term water intrusion. The foundation was not collapsing. It had not moved outside normal seasonal tolerance. Lyra logged every measurement twice. At lunch, she left to meet Evelyn Park, the tenant attorney Mara had found through the preservation network. Marcus arrived while she was gone. He studied the grid. Clean work. The structural grid is hers, I said. She logged every pier twice. Marcus looked at the pages again. Then she's better organized than half the contractors I inspect. Priya signed a preliminary certification stating that the residential wing and foundation were safe. The conservatory required a localized engineered repair, and the defect was curable without vacancy. Marcus performed his own inspection under city authority. He did not decide the lease. He did not declare Trenton guilty of anything. He measured the structure, reviewed Priya's report, limited the red tag to the damaged roof bay, and scheduled a clearance inspection for the morning of moving day, provided the temporary bracing remained intact. That afternoon, Evelyn met us in a small conference room above a bakery. She placed 4 documents in front of Lyra. Emergency stay request, she said. Notice of cure. Lawful counteroffer requiring the owner to fund the pre-existing structural repair while rent continues into escrow, and a lease enforcement petition based on interference with access. Lyra read each page. Evelyn tapped the redevelopment permit Mara had found. This is motive, not automatic proof. But the corridor crossing your parcel, the planning deadline, the ignored repair request, and the overbroad lockout attempt establish a pattern. What happens next? Lyra asked. We file today. The housing judge may issue a short stay based on the current record, then hold an expedited hearing after Trenton receives notice. Your moving company is still booked? At 4 on hearing day. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. I needed a plan if we lost. Good. Hope is not a storage strategy. I liked her immediately. Lyra signed every filing herself. When Evelyn asked whether I would submit my assessment, I looked at Lyra first. She nodded. Your measurements, Priya's conclusions, my lease timeline. The filings went in before the clerk's office closed. That night, Jonah found me cutting replacement joinery in the temporary site shed. You're doing Priya's engineered repair, the craftsman porch, and the hotel documentation? The hotel documentation is photographs. You also haven't answered Oregon. I'm declining Oregon. The saw went silent. Jonah leaned against the bench. Because of her? Because I'm tired of leaving. That was almost a feeling. Should I call someone? I slid the workshop lease across the bench. Signed. 3 years. Jonah read the first page, then checked the signature as if it might disappear. You missed 2 appointments to sign this. I was busy. You were afraid. I was also busy. He handed it back. Delegate the craftsman roof to me tomorrow. I can finish both. That isn't the question. I thought about Lyra's hand covering the permit map. Take the crew, I said. Call me if the East Ledger moves more than an eighth. Jonah smiled. Look at that. Personal growth with tolerances? The hearing took place 11 days later. By then, Trenton had been served. The temporary stay prevented lockout while both sides prepared. Rent had gone into escrow on time. Priya completed her signed engineering report. Marcus limited the code violation to the roof bay and confirmed the cure plan met city requirements. Mara produced the original lease exhibits and the historic utility easement. Evelyn organized the chain of documents by date. Trenton's attorney argued that the safety clause gave the owner broad discretion and that Lyra's business use increased liability. He described the move as a reasonable response to a dangerous building. Evelyn did not answer first. Lyra did. She stood with the original lease in both hands. Her thumbnail touched her index finger once, then stopped. The owner was notified of the roof leak 22 days before the storm, she said. He did not repair it. After the beam failed, I requested inspection. He used the preliminary restriction to serve a 48-hour termination, attempted to lock the entire studio despite a limited red tag, and rejected a documented cure before the independent engineer had inspected. She handed the clerk the dated maintenance emails. The lease requires final determination, notice, and an opportunity to cure. I provided all three. I also continued rent through escrow. I am asking the court to enforce the lease, keep the stay in place during the localized repair, and prohibit interference with access beyond the restricted bay. The judge turned to Priya. Priya authenticated her report and explained the load path, resistance drill readings, moisture pattern, and the difference between a failed roof connection and a failed foundation. I testified only to what I had measured and built, the temporary 6x6 bracing, pier grid, timber conditions, and repair scope. I did not call Trenton a liar. The numbers handled that. Marcus confirmed the city's limited order and stated that an owner could not convert a one-bay restriction into a whole premises lockout under the building notice. Then Mara presented the planning application. The proposed boutique hotel's loading corridor crossed Lyra's leased parcel. The planning board review was scheduled for the following Monday. Trenton's project could not meet access requirements while Lyra retained possession. The room became very quiet. Evelyn placed Trenton's rejected counteroffer beside the permit map. The owner declined a funded cure that preserved rent and safety because cure was not his objective. Vacancy was... The judge adjusted her glasses. You don't force a seized bolt. My mentor used to say, pressure in the right place did more than force everywhere. The court granted lease enforcement, continued the stay through completion of the engineered repair, ordered restoration of full access outside the limited safety bay, and required Trenton to respond to the counteroffer in good faith. Rent would remain in escrow until the repair obligations were resolved. The judge also preserved Lyra's right to seek fees for the attempted overbroad lockout. Trenton did not lose his building. He lost the shortcut through hers. Outside the courtroom, Lyra held the certified order against her chest. Evelyn checked the time. Clearance inspection at 2:30, movers at 4. Lyra looked at me. We're cutting this close. I work in old buildings. Close is where the measurements live. That explains several things about you. We drove back to the coast. At 2:17 on moving day, she returned my spare key. That was the moment on the porch, the key warm in my hand, the 3 canvas suitcases waiting, the order still traveling through the clerk's electronic system. Lyra had won the hearing, but she had spent 6 weeks learning that paper victories could arrive after practical damage. The moving company would still come. Trenton could still appeal. Marcus still had to clear the bay. Priya's engineered repair still had to be completed. I can stay at Mara's until the green tag is posted, she said. I'm not gambling my work on another delay. That's reasonable. You hate that it's reasonable. Yes. She looked toward the craftsman next door. Jonah's crew worked along the porch roof without me. My signed workshop lease sat in the glove box of my truck. Where are you going after this contract? She asked. The old answer would have been wherever the next damaged building paid me to be. I signed the harbor workshop lease. Her eyes returned to mine. 3 years? 3. And Oregon? Declined. The breeze pushed a loose strand of hair across her cheek. She tucked it back, studying me as if I were a structure that had finally revealed its load path. My phone rang. Marcus. Clearance is signed. He said, Priya's bracing remains mandatory until permanent repair, but the foundation claim is closed. I'm 5 minutes away with the green tag. A second notification arrived from Evelyn. Certified order filed, access protected, owner counsel acknowledged. At 3:26, Trenton's truck entered the driveway. At 3:28, Marcus parked behind him. At 3:31, the moving truck turned onto the block. The driver lowered his window. Lyra Moore. Yes, she called. Do I start the waiting fee now or after the dramatic confrontation? Lyra looked at me. At least someone respects procedure. Trenton stepped onto the porch with another locksmith and a printed notice in his hand. The order doesn't excuse the hazardous condition, he said. Marcus walked past him and placed a green clearance tag beside the conservatory entry. The city's final determination limits the hazard to the repaired roof bay. Residential occupancy and unaffected studio access are approved. Trenton held up his notice. I'm appealing. You may, Lyra said. She took the certified court order from her portfolio. Until then, the stay is active, my lease is enforceable, my rent is in escrow, and your locksmith has no authority to enter. The locksmith looked at Trenton. I'm leaving. Lyra stepped to the edge of the porch where the driver, Marcus, Jonah, Mara, and half my crew could hear her. You ignored a reported defect, exaggerated the scope after it failed, and tried to use my home as access for a hotel corridor you never disclosed. The court has the timeline. The planning board has the easement map. You will leave my driveway now. Trenton's jaw tightened. He returned to his truck. The driver lifted his clipboard. So, boxes in or boxes out? Lyra watched Trenton disappear at the corner. Then she looked at the 3 canvas suitcases. Out of the truck, she said. Back inside. The driver nodded. Turnaround fee is cheaper than heartbreak. I don't set company policy. Mara laughed. Jonah covered a grin with his hand. Lyra came down the porch steps and stopped in front of me. When I gave you the key, she said quietly, I thought returning it would make leaving simpler. I took the brass key from my pocket. It had warmed again against my leg. I set it in her open palm and folded her fingers over it. Come home. She looked down at our hands, then up at me. I am home, she said. You're the part I wasn't naming. The moving crew carried the suitcases back through the front door. The permanent repair began Monday under Priya's stamped plan. I let Jonah keep control of the craftsman crew while I worked with a smaller team in the conservatory. We removed the damaged bay, documented every connection, replaced the failed member with properly detailed timber, added flashing where Trenton's maintenance contractor had omitted it, and restored the glass without altering the Victorian frame. Lyra worked at a table in the safe end of the studio, completing a commission of coastal sage and dune grass. Sometimes she asked for a measurement, sometimes I asked whether a bracket line looked wrong. We spent entire stretches saying nothing while saw teeth whispered through cedar and her brush moved over paper. At noon on the 3rd day, she set Earl Grey beside my plans. 3 minutes, she said, no sugar. You remembered, I maintain excellent records. A small fern appeared in the harbor workshop before I moved in. Then another. By the 4th plan, I asked whether she intended to turn the place into a conservatory. It looked like a lumber warehouse. It is a lumber warehouse. It has windows. That creates responsibility. Jonah walked in carrying a box of hardware. I support the plants. They're the only employees not afraid to tell him when he's overwatering. I delegated the hardware inventory to him and went home before dark. 6 weeks after moving day, the conservatory reopened. The lease remained in force. Trenton's boutique hotel proposal was deferred after the planning board found the service corridor depended on rights he did not possess. He eventually accepted the court-supervised counteroffer. Repair costs credited through escrow, no interference with Lyra's grandfathered use, and written notice requirements for any future access. Evelyn closed the emergency case but kept the file within reach. Mara donated copies of the original parcel maps to the local preservation archive, where she labeled the box important despite previous male opinion. Lyra's delayed commission was accepted. The client ordered 2 more pieces. Jonah became field supervisor on the craftsman restoration, which meant I no longer had to pretend the company would collapse if I ate lunch sitting down. At the harbor workshop opening, Marcus came to inspect the new dust extraction system and stayed for coffee. Priya brought a tiny cactus in a pot shaped like a hard hat. Evelyn arrived with the final escrow release. Mara stood beside a framed copy of the historic easement map as if she had personally defeated time. Lyra placed a folder on the main workbench. Inside was a shared plan. The front alcove would serve as a small botanical display and client meeting space. The back remained my joinery floor. Her studio stayed at the Victorian, but the workshop gave both of us a public place to meet preservation clients. She signed the plan first, then she handed me the pen. Marcus glanced between us. Business partners? Lyra hooked the brass spare key onto the ring beside my workshop key. This is Azaiah, she said, my partner. Later, after the last guest left, we locked the workshop and walked back to the Victorian. The porch light shone over the restored trim. Lyra inserted the brass key into the old deadbolt. It turned without resistance. Some things stayed because we had finally stopped forcing them. The end. Closing thoughts. Real support does not erase another person's choices. Azaiah's strongest work was not taking control of Lyra's fight. It was giving her accurate tools, standing beside her, and trusting her to use them. Stability became possible when both of them stopped treating independence as the same thing as isolation. Healthy love asks permission, shares information, respects professional boundaries, and makes room for the other person's voice in public decisions. Toxic passion uses urgency as an excuse to control, withhold facts, or turn help into leverage. Azaiah's growth is visible when he stops rescuing in secret, begins asking what Lyra wants, delegates his own workload, and chooses commitment through practical action. If this story made you believe that a key can mean more when it is freely returned, please like the video, subscribe, and share in the comments which moment mattered most to you: the courtroom stand, the moving truck turnaround, or the quiet click of the lock when they finally came home together.